You don't really need an advanced degree, except if you want to be an executive, and you just kind of destroyed that that statement.
Yeah, I mean, we see both.
Hmm.
So, again, like degrees will help, but then also, I mean, experience, like there's no substitute for experience. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you might have, I've worked with extremely talented technologists that have degrees in things way outside of technology. In no way did anyone tell me like, oh yeah, you should go get your master's degree, or
Yeah.
like you need it to get to the next level. I mean, I I could have been in this same seat with this same role talking to you about this without it. It's
Without it.
just,
Wow.
I, it was more for my own intellectual curiosity than anything career related.
Mm. Okay, welcome back to the Tech Jobber podcast, and we definitely have a treat for you guys today. We are taking a visit to the executive suite with our first CTO on the show. Have a lot of questions like, how does one become a tech executive? What's it like making decisions that are, potentially costing or making the company billions of dollars? I guess I'll have to ask him that. So we have John Damalas, the CTO of JM Family, a local South Florida company that I definitely want to ask him a lot of questions about. But John, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, so let's kind of go back to the start of your journey.
Yeah.
And how you got into technology. Were you into it as a kid? And let's just go into that.
Yeah, definitely. I'll spare you the early years of my childhood, but
Sure.
yeah, I would say middle school, even going into high school, was always into tech. Loved taking things apart. Like most of us or many of us, fell in love with video games. So
Sure.
that was probably my earliest foray into tech, was a user, and then got into building PCs and all that good stuff. In high school, I ended up being one of the webmasters for my high school, so kind of got into a little bit of software there. And then, ended up going to college for computer science, engineering school in upstate New York called Rensselaer Polytech, or RPI. And then GE has a really big manufacturing facility, and actually it was the historic place of Thomas Edison's lab in Schenectady, which is right next to RPI. So they recruited heavily from the school. They have had and still have a ton of really great early career technology programs. The acronyms change every few years, but when I went through it was called ITLP, or Information Technology Leadership Program. That's how I made my, I'd say, professional entry into the industry. And but yeah, have always had a passion for tech, have been in and around tech, and haven't looked back.
Wow. Okay. So why don't we talk about your decision to go the leadership path
Yeah.
versus the individual contributor path? What made you decide that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and I love the fact that you brought that up, because even though it was called a leadership program, I was still, it was an engineering program. So I did a tour through cybersecurity, I did a tour through enterprise systems, I did a tour through a manufacturing facility and the IT systems that are behind a manufacturing facility. And then later in my career, I became a people leader. But that concept of leadership, especially in technology, I find a lot of people are like, all right, if you're a leader, that means you manage people. Like, maybe, can be. That is certainly one path to leadership. But I think the dynamic and the differentiator of programs like that is it open the aperture of how I perceive technology, that it's not just coding. Like, coding, software engineering, super important part of it. But it also gave me exposure to like the business dynamics and the financials that are in and around technology, and really like the business impact of what technology is there to solve. Which, I mean, I know that made me part of the leader and eventual people leader that I am today, is just
Sure.
that appreciation and reverence. I love the tech. I love squeaking out, the performance in a function or an algorithm or something as much as anybody else. But the actual holistic understanding of, all right, what are we actually trying to do with this thing? What problem are we trying to solve? And then be able to translate and speak the language, not just of, the engineering or the technology community, but the business leaders too, so that you get them to care as much about the technology, as you care about the business problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah. Yeah. And how important was having that foundation? I mean, it seems like they gave you a taste of everything. Now you have to wear all the hats, correct? Yeah. You have to know about everything.
Exactly.
Where I guess perhaps some CTOs come up and they were just really good in one aspect, and then they get that job, and now they have to kind of play a little catch up. Maybe they didn't have to.
Well, and it's an interesting concept. Even like the title of a CTO. Like if you ask, and I do ask this, I ask my peers all the time, like, all right, so like, what is the actual scope of your role? Like, all of us, like, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit nuanced. I'll take myself as an example. As the CTO at JM Family, I've got some of the typical CTO-y responsibilities that you would assume: architecture, engineering practices. But I also have technology sourcing or procurement. So I deal with a lot of contracts with technology vendors, software vendors, staffing vendors. I also have strategy and communications. So not just the strategy of what we're doing with like cloud or microservices or Kubernetes or the technical pieces of technology strategy, but how are we overall organized as a function, even across my peers? How are we aligned to our business partners and the problems that they're trying to solve? And how do we position ourselves not just for success this year? Like, yeah, we want to reduce major incidents. We want to reduce the mean time to resolve issues when they occur. Yeah, we want to have more deployments of higher quality. But all right, what do we want to be in 5 years as an organization, aligned to more broadly where JM Family as a business wants to be in 5 years?
Right.
Which, not a lot of CTOs have a direct play in that. Some other CTOs that I talk to have a lot of responsibilities in other areas that I don't. So, for example, I co-sponsor our AI COE and our data organization, whereas some CTOs have that directly within their organization. Some organizations have a separate chief data officer.
Yeah.
That's their remit. So it's funny, I talk to a lot of folks that are like, oh, how can I be a CTO? Like, and my first question is, like, what do you actually want to do? And then, how does or doesn't that align to what a CTO does? And if there's a particular company, and it goes true for a lot of different titles, whether it's I want to be a director, I want to be even like a data scientist. We were talking about this earlier. Like a data scientist role can mean a little bit different things in different organizations. So it's important to dig in a click or two deeper and understand, like, what do you actually do all day?
Right. Right. Well, and one question I definitely wanted to ask you, because you talked about the contracts.
Yeah.
Right. And I deal mainly in my recruiting business in consultants. So has there ever been a moment where, obviously, what everyone is making?
Yeah.
Correct. Where, okay, at your level, everyone at your level is obviously making more than the high level consultants, but they get to leave at 5:00. Have you ever had a moment like, I'm going to be working on this project till 8. This guy is making really good money, and it's 5:00. He's walking out the door.
Yeah, it's funny. There have been a bunch of different points in my career where I've calculated like my hour, the hourly equivalent, and and part of it, and this is another thing we were talking about earlier. It goes back to like what's the holistic picture of what you as an individual want to be satisfied in a particular role. Like compensation is one thing, and like I can talk about compensation structures. There's like all kinds of different different things and different widgets that go into those. But then there's, all right, how much energy do you get from what you're working on? Like what kind of leader are you working with? Like what opportunities do you have to develop yourself? The work-life balance or work-life integration, flexibility. How much can you leave it at, leave office at the office versus you bring it home with you? Exactly. But yeah, it's funny. There certainly have been a few points, certainly in my career where I'm like, yeah, I'll be here all night. Or like, man, I bet they don't get, calls at 2 a.m. on the weekend. But,
no, they're home.
Exactly.
They're watching TV. Well, back to GE. Why don't we talk about? I mean, obviously everyone's aware of GE. Why don't you talk about some of the stuff you were doing there?
Yeah, definitely. I mentioned leadership program. So GE had one. We started one at Pacific Life when I was there too. for specific to technology. And so the first 2 years was really just learning. Like, yeah, you're earning your paycheck and you're delivering valuable work, but it's learning about business. It's learning about how technology actually operates in an enterprise. I remember, I can tell this story. The first time I heard reference to a production environment was like my first job out of school. I'm like, you're coding in college, or you're going through boot camps or whatever. You don't have this concept of a production environment. You bang something out on your laptop, and like maybe it's a group project. So I would sit there in these meetings, and they're like talking about like, oh yeah, we're gonna go to production, like production. I'm like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Like,
what are you talking about?
no idea what you're talking about. So it's things like that. I use that as a specific example that unless you're exposed to those types of actual applied technologies, that was really what that first 2 years was like. So one, learn how technology operates in an industry. And then also, I was fortunate enough to, it was a rotational program. So you did 6-month rotations in different parts of technology, even different areas of the business. So, little flavor of cybersecurity, flavor of infrastructure, engineering, application support, those kind of things. So even though, my passion was more on the software side and the data side, and we can talk a little bit about this later. I'm sure we'll talk about data.
Yeah.
I had an appreciation for the perspectives of all those other functions in technology. So, when you are doing a data engineering project, I can reflect back on my cybersecurity days and be like, by no means am I a cybersecurity expert, but I knew enough to know when I had to raise my hand and ask one.
Yeah.
I use the analogy. I took a business law class in college. I mean, this is reaching. The first thing that the professor said was, at the end of this class, you're not going to be a lawyer. You're not going to have enough knowledge to like do your own stuff, but you're going to know enough to know when you have to raise your hand and ask, ask a lawyer. It's kind of like the same thing for that first 2 years. You learn enough so that you know when to ask and when to engage. After that, I took a role in the nuclear energy business. It was based in North Carolina. That was a phenomenal couple of years. Again, I kind of happened to luck into data with that first role because it was back before data science was a thing.
Yeah.
It was back before even Python was a big thing. It was back before machine learning was a big thing, and it was relational data modeling and data warehousing and business intelligence, and it was again learning how to connect. Here's what's important to the business. Here is where different parts of the business generate data. How do you bring that together? How do you visualize it? And how do you use it to tell a story? Which, at a certain level of abstraction, you can apply that to machine learning. You can apply that to generative AI and large language models. It's what data is out there? What problem are you trying to solve? How do you bring it together? And how ultimately do you use that data to tell a story or to solve some sort of problem? So I got the data bug, let's say at the nuclear business, did that for a couple of years. And then I did a little bit of you could maybe call it a detour. I joined the internal audit staff at General Electric. Okay. So, which, a lot of people would be like, well, you weren't from finance. Like, why would you go into audit? One, like there was, I'll say like a technology track in the audit staff. But that again, just gave me a really amazing additional perspective on, all right, now I'm not just, delivering, deploying, and doing engineering, but now you have to force yourself to think about some of the risks that are involved in some of these different technologies and workflows. Yeah. So that was another, awesome 3 years, another whirlwind tour through a bunch of other different industries, whether it was like deposit taking, banking, to I actually worked in 30 Rock at NBC Universal Pictures back when GE owned them. Yeah. Got to ride the Harry Potter ride in Universal Studios when it was first open. But again, you see a bunch of different industries. You really see technology in action. So that was the next 3 years. Then after that, I spent some time in the transportation business. So heavy duty freight locomotives. It's interesting, one, like huge manufacturing operation, really deep engineering from all disciplines, mechanical, electrical, thermodynamic. But again, technology in action. Yeah. And just a phenomenal learning experience with, just another phenomenally talented group of individuals. Ironically or incidentally, the end of internal audit and that role was when I transitioned into a people leadership role. And we can certainly talk about that too. That was another, I'd say, just eye-opening light bulb aha moment of a lot of folks just tend to think like, oh, at some level, I'm an engineer or I'm whatever in technology, you get to a certain point. The next logical step is just being a people leader.
Yeah.
Like, I guess I got to be a manager.
I've done it. I can lead it. Right?
Exactly. And couldn't be farther from the truth.
Sure.
Like, just because you're an awesome, amazing, brilliant engineer doesn't necessarily say you'll make the leap into, being a phenomenal people leader. It is like, it's a discipline, it's a skill set. Just like if, you want to learn a new programming language or, you want to learn a new technical discipline or you want to learn finance, people leadership it's a set of tools in your tool belt. Not that it's as mechanical or algorithmic as learning a programming language. But if you're intentional about it and you try and you learn skills, you can be a good and you can be a better people leader.
What were some of the biggest, I guess epiphanies or like, wow, I had no idea that my managers were dealing with this type of stuff the whole time.
So if I have another one of those, very moments that's burned into my memory. I went through this training. It was like new manager development. And the first thing they said, kind of similar to that quote that my professor used at business law, like the opening quote from this training session was, "Welcome to being the topic of dinner conversation." And we were like, what? It's like, when you're a manager, like, just think of how many times, like, either when you were growing up and your parents, at the dinner table, they were like, oh yeah, my boss did this, or
right.
it's like now you are somebody's boss. And
wow.
You're going to be the topic of dinner conversation. So just, you have that in mind, like how you show up to work, how you interact with people. Like that was just like you might have a super stressful morning. We were talking, I've got a 5-year-old. Well, as of yesterday, she's 5, and maybe it's a stressful morning. Maybe it takes a little bit longer to get out the door. Maybe like a waffle with jelly ended up like on my face that morning.
Right.
And that first meeting, you got to show up and you got to be positive. And every interaction you have throughout the day, whether it's with associates or employees that work for you directly or just in the company. Like you're the topic of dinner conversation.
Right.
And it was just like, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So you went to people leadership and then what from there at GE?
Yeah. So that was in the Locomotives business. And then, that was leading a software engineering team and also some data folks. And then I moved from there to the energy business in Atlanta. So there were a lot of actual like geographic moves to physical moves between these. Then in the power generation business, the energy services business, did a couple things. So I had a software team that I led there, but that was actually the first time that I directly led a team of data scientists. So that was back when data science was a thing and machine learning was in its heyday, and a lot of just really amazing, again, super bright, talented individuals, some problems, business problems that could now be solved by this new set of keys that was machine learning, advanced analytics, and that was another almost 3 years working with engineering organizations, supply chain, contracts, but on the other side, so part of the business model for that individual businesses, they would have what's called long-term service agreements. So, an agreement to maintain and service a set of power generation equipment at a power plant or, a set of utilities.
Wow.
And, those are very complex contractual agreements, a lot of financials. And so being able to use data to inform, the formulation of that contract and then the execution of the services associated with that contract was just a huge opportunity. And it really was a win-win for both the company and the customers because, you could make sure that your goals were aligned financially, and then everyone was working optimally in service of the terms and conditions of that contract. So it was just, another really interesting few years. And then that was, after that role, that's when I made the move and joined Walmart.
Yeah, so that's obviously something I want to talk a lot about. So you said you were at GE for 12 years?
Yeah, about 12, 13 years. Yeah.
Okay, and you said, I don't want to just be a lifer, even though you did enjoy the company. You said, let me get some diversity in my resume as far as companies, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of one of those moments. I was there working, like, absolutely loved my role, loved my manager. The company was great. They had taken great care of me, but it was one of those decision points of, I'm a lifelong learner. Not that I certainly would claim to have learned everything I could have, in the role or at the company at the time, but it was like, been here 12, 13 years. It was kind of that crossroads of, if I stay for too much longer, I might lose even just the appetite or the willingness to take the risk, because it is a big risk.
Right.
It's a big risk. You've grown up in a company, you were born, you were raised there, I would say. But I just said, hey, this is great. But I also saw, a point personally and professionally, that I could make the leap, and opportunity arose with some leaders I had worked with previously, and had the great privilege and pleasure of joining Walmart.
Yeah. So, and you were primarily involved in the data side at Walmart?
Yeah. So it was my role. I led an organization called the Associate Digital Experience, which was essentially, our charter, or the remit of that team was the experience that associates, around the globe, both in the stores and in the home office, have with technology, and how can they leverage technology in order to better serve Walmart's customers. And that included everything from help desk and service operations to laptops, home office, visitor management, all the way audio visual, all the way to how do we better leverage data, in and around these experiences, and with the associates at large, to elevate the service that they can provide to customers. So it was very heavy data component, and then also a lot of systems and technologies that generated and consumed that data.
And how many employees or associates do they have, Walmart?
You'll have to fact check me. Those at home, fact check me with the most current numbers.
Roughly.
Yeah, exactly. Roughly, I would say at the time it was about 2.2 million associates around the world. Yeah,
That's wild.
and
That's wild.
yeah, it was. It's just the scale is just mind blowing. It's like U.S. government, Chinese government, Walmart, top 3 employers in the world.
Wow.
So Walmart, largest private employer in the world.
Yeah.
I would say, universe, I guess, unless there's some alien civilization out there, you never know. But yeah, tons of associates, tons of data, and then it was really interesting because even in the technology organization, again at the time it was about 10,000, 11,000 just in technology. But it was just a tremendous opportunity.
And so what are some data insights you had that you guys discovered that kind of helped move the bottom line or save them money? And
I can give some. I'll start with maybe one interesting example at GE, and then I'll give you an interesting example at Walmart.
Sure.
Part of what the data science team at GE did is, there's a lot of maintenance operations for all these power generation equipment, and you've got to allocate people with different roles and different skill sets, and just it's a giant optimization problem, just ripe for an algorithm. So that was one of the things that the team had worked on there, and very much moved the bottom line in that you can optimize the cost associated with these maintenance operations. Similarly with associates, associates in a store, making sure that we've got the best allocation of roles and departments and those kind of things. I mean, things as simple as in a service deli, that's the part of the store that it actually functions more like a restaurant than a retail store, because you've got your your rotisserie chickens and your deli and hot food and cold food and all that, and so on the weekends, that is when a lot of customers leverage the service deli. I mean, obviously lunchtime during the week, but also,
Yeah.
you know, on the weekends, because you're
You're
already
shopping
grocery
there for a while.
shopping. Exactly. You know, get some prepared food. So just having the right mix of associates on weekend hours to drive sales, you know, maybe they can stagger their weekends not on Saturday and Sunday. So you have, you know, the right roles and the right level of associates in the service deli on the weekends, you know, can see measurable impact in service deli sales.
And think about this, like, you know, Walmart is so massive in scale. Just that little department is probably one of the biggest restaurants in the country. Like just their service deli on its own is one of the biggest restaurants in the country, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it just goes to show you like the power of scale,
Sure.
but B, you know, technology, I'll venture to say technology is nothing without problems that it can solve for the world. So like, yeah, you can have the most elegant algorithm or like the most elegant software solution, but when you can understand really the dynamics of a business model and how businesses make money and what impacts the top and the bottom line, like, and it, you know, in our case, in that team's case, you know, identifying how we can optimize labor hours, things like that. Like that's really when A, the power of technology is unleashed, and B, kind of to relate it back to, you know, staffing and us and you out there as technologists looking for roles, that ability to understand and apply technology to business problems and speak in the language of business, it's such a differentiator.
Yeah. And how many people were under your organization? So essentially it was a data organization focused on the internal employees.
Yeah, there was that, as you know, as well as a few other teams. I would say all in all, it was around 400.
Wow.
You know, at that organization. But again, you know, size and scale of Walmart, and that's just another. I know you didn't ask about this, but I'll volunteer it as other advice around people leadership. A lot of people maybe are wrapped up in, wow, what's the size of the team? Like how many people are in my org? Like I've led teams of several hundred. I've led teams of 5. I've led teams of 50 to 60. It's there's just a ton of power and a ton of value that you can bring regardless of the team size.
Yeah, and obviously like the problems you solve, even if you, again at that scale, which is just kind of tough to wrap your head around.
Yeah,
you save them a fraction of a percent, could be hundreds of millions of dollars to billions in some cases, right?
Exactly.
It's
yeah.
wild.
But it is, I would say it's a very different experience because, when you have a team, you do all hands. Like in that example, my all hands would have to be held in an auditorium
Right.
with me on stage, versus other teams where like, yeah, we can sit in a conference room
Sure.
or, have a conversation in a place like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So anything else at Walmart?
Yeah. I would say it was just another, be on the lookout for hidden gems. I'm not from Arkansas. I didn't have any friends at the time that were from or grew up anywhere in and around Arkansas. And, it was one of those when I was going through looking at opportunities like, yep, this is, it's based in Bentonville. Like I've never been there before.
Right.
And I'll fast forward, once people learned that I had moved there and they're like, oh, like you went from like New York City and Chicago and Atlanta and now you're living in Arkansas. Like how was that? Went there for the first time. Like Northwest Arkansas is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
Like world-class art museum, like great restaurants, great shops. Like there's an airport there, the university's there. And I know a lot of people just by their reaction that when I told them I was moving, they're like, "Oh, you're moving to Arkansas?" Like, yeah. Come visit.
Yeah.
Like they'd come visit and they'd be like, "Oh my
great.
God, this place is great." Like, how much was your house? It's like, This is great. But yeah, it was just, another, again, for what it's worth, like try stuff, like go visit things. And this could be geographically, it could be like, I don't, if you're, let's say a data person and, they're like, all right, I don't want to do cybersecurity. It's like, that's
Right.
for cyber. It's like, try it. Like,
Yeah.
even if you just have friends or, can like spend time with a team. If there's a security team wherever you're working, or like just try it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So at what point do you make the jump to Pacific Life?
Yeah. So it was I want to say about a year into COVID. Our daughter was born in Arkansas, and it was one of those situations where like Walmart is and was a phenomenal organization to work for. Absolutely loved my team, loved my staff, loved the leadership I was working for, and was one of those answered a LinkedIn message of be interested in a CTO role, and like tell me more.
Yeah.
And happened to be at Pacific Life and based on the West Coast. It was another one where wasn't running from anything, ended up running to what turned out to be another phenomenal opportunity and kind of the next step in my career. One reason with loved the domain, loved associate technology, digital experience. The CTO role at Pacific Life gave me the opportunity to again have a much wider aperture on what I was responsible for, what I was working with, and also a little bit of a different industry. So moved a ton in GE, went and saw retail in Walmart, great experience. Then had a tour in the insurance and financial services industry with Pacific Life.
Yeah. And what were some of the differences? Financial services. Pacific Life is like 150 years old, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 150 years old. Still Fortune 300. So very financially stable. It's a mutual company, so it's not a public company. So that was another big difference between GE's a public company, or three public companies now. Walmart's a public company. Pacific Life was a mutual company, and then I know we'll talk about JM. JM's a private company.
What's a mutual company versus a public company? I mean, what's the difference?
So basically, a mutual company is the ownership is with the policyholders. So you're kind of you are an owner as a policyholder. So there's not external shareholders that own the company through stock. Which also means, similar to a private company, there's not, equity. It's all, there's not like stock or stock options or things like that. You don't look at a stock ticker or anything like that.
Right. So then how was your compensation structured? Because a lot of the executive levels, it's salary, bonus, stock, or salary, bonus, equity.
Yeah.
How did that look like?
Yeah. A lot of how the compensation structure works, and this is for a lot of non-public companies, is the mechanics are similar. It's just short-term versus long-term cash. So salary is a salary, short-term bonus is relatively consistent, percentage, and how well you do, how well the company does. That is one thing that changes, as you move up in an organization, is typically more of the bonus structure is based on how the company does versus individual performance. That also, it aligns your work to the success of the overall organization. And then long-term, that's really where the big difference is, a lot of long-term compensation in a public company will either be stock, like actual reserve shares, RSUs, whereas in private companies, it's more cash-based. So instead of stock that vests over time, it's, here's a
chunks of
cash payment, exactly.
Okay.
That might increase or decrease based on future performance of the company.
Yeah.
But comes to you as a payment as opposed to a set of now equity vehicles that, at Walmart, you got your vested stock, and then you had to make the decision of, all right, do I hold on to it? Do I sell it? What do I do with it? Where with obviously the cash payments, it's cash.
Is it like, it's kind of like a dividend of the company profits? Is the cash? I mean,
kind of. The actual mechanism varies a bit company to company. They typically, will tie it to some metrics of business performance. So, year over year, there are certain measurements and metrics. It could be things like revenue. It could be things like net income. It could be things like free cash flow. And then, based off of certain targets, that'll influence the bonus structure and the payment structure. It's a, really good lesson learned. I learned this throughout multiple points in my career, is like, do your research,
Yes.
and don't be afraid to ask questions, because a lot of these compensation structures can appear, super complicated, and a lot of them are, but it's in the company's best interest to explain it to you in a way that you're like, okay, all right, now, I get it, and it's something I can be excited about.
Okay. And so you were there for how long?
I was there for almost 3 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And then you get the call, JM Family. You said you'd never heard of them.
Yeah. So actually, it's another just funny exchange of like, got that message of, would you be interested in an exploratory conversation about an executive role at the time it was an $18 billion private company based in South Florida. And I was sitting there scratching my head. I'm like, who? Like, what company could this, because I didn't even know the name at the time. Like, what company could this even be? I'm like, all right, I'll bite. Like, I just want to know what company it is.
Sure.
And then, one thing led to another, met the leadership team, came down here to Deerfield, the campus, the main campus is in Deerfield, and, saw the campus, talked to a bunch of the associates, talked to the leadership team, and just fell in love with the culture, with the company, with the structure, with the role, with the team. And the rest is history. Yeah, moved down here in October and haven't looked back.
Now, from California, you heard, because around here everyone's like, we're such a tech hub in South Florida. Was that news getting out to California, or were they like,
I hadn't, and maybe my perception is wrong. I had heard a little bit of some of the migration. A lot of it having to do with financial services, and a lot of that, moving from New York, New Jersey, especially during the pandemic. I knew of a couple bigger companies that were down here. Obviously, Miami metro area is going to be a big hub for a lot of things.
Sure.
Hadn't really heard a whole ton around the tech scene here. So that was, when I got here, one of the reasons why, A, I love what you're doing with the show, and B, just super interested in building my network down here is to see what's going on, what companies are down here, what talent's down here, even, there are universities that are down here. I've met some phenomenal grads from universities all around Florida, but even just building relationships with, with the academic institutions around here is something I'm super interested in.
Yeah. And why don't you explain exactly what JM Family does?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that is a great question.
Surprising that they're so big.
Exactly. Well, because that was like the second question. I'm like, all right, what's the name of the company? And then like, what do they do?
Yeah.
So some say brands that folks might be more familiar with are Southeast Toyota Finance, JM&A Group. So JM Family Enterprises is the world's largest independent distributor of Toyota. So we support the 177 Toyota dealers here in North and South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. And so, we partner obviously very closely with Toyota. We get the vehicles from Toyota. We offer parts and vehicle processing, and then allocate those to the dealers. So that's Southeast Toyota. Southeast Toyota Finance is the financial services arm for Toyota in the same 5-state region. So if you get a Toyota auto loan or a lease at a Toyota dealership, that's SCTF. Exactly. Wow. Yep. That's through JM Family, through our Southeast Toyota Finance division. JM&A Group, another phenomenal business, essentially created, what's known as the F&I market, or financing and insurance. So if you think about when you purchase a vehicle or lease a vehicle, so you'll say, I want a Land Cruiser. The new Land Cruisers are awesome, by the way. Check them out. Yeah. Grand Highlander, RAV4, and then there's like, all right, how am I going to pay for it, loan or a lease? And then it'd be like, okay, we've got extended warranty, tire wheel protection, paint protection, some of those other voluntary protection products. That's the market that JM&A essentially created, and and is a very big player in. So that's another one of our big business units. Outside of those core automotive business units, have a very interesting and healthy, holdings business. We've got a title and escrow business based in the Pacific Northwest, home franchise concepts, a company called Rolly Zachmeda that provides components for like industrial shades and blinds and residential shades and blinds automation. So a little bit of diversification from automotive there, but yeah, just huge partner with Toyota, and just a really healthy, amazing business started by Mr. Jim Moran, hence JM, back in the 60s.
Now, was this all through acquisitions? They just created these business units, or did they just kind of start them on their own?
So the automotive businesses were created essentially with the partnership between Mr. Moran and Toyota, and then from that kind of spawned the financial services arm, and from that spawned the F&I and the JM&A group. So those were more organic growth. There's been some tuck-in acquisitions, but primarily organic. The holdings company is primarily through acquisitions. So healthy bit of both organic and some acquisitional growth.
Yeah. And what type of technology issues are you facing? Obviously, all those different units are, for the most part, interconnected. Obviously, the blinds are not connected to the Toyotas, but the rest of them are all very heavily connected. So I'm assuming you're using technology to bridge all of those units, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a phenomenal question, and it gives me a little bit of flashbacks to GE days too, where it's like, all right, you've got nuclear energy and heavy-duty freight locomotives and credit cards. It's like how similar, and Harry Potter rides, exactly. How similar could those all be? So if you think about JM Family, you've got all of the opportunities and technology problems you can solve of a heavy supply chain manufacturing organization. So there's a lot of technology around supply chain optimization, and how we allocate vehicles, how we distribute parts, and all the logistics behind that, and all the technology and data behind that. In the Southeast Toyota business, you've got all of the considerations of a financial services arm with Southeast Toyota Finance. So you think about auto loans and leases, it's like, well, just like a bank that has to store and process and service and protect the data of auto loans and leases. You've got technology that's around that. In the JM&A group and the F&I side, it behaves a bit like an insurance business. So it was interesting coming from Pacific Life and and they're like, oh yeah, we've got actuaries. I'm like, oh, I know exactly what actuaries are, and actuarial sciences and the systems, and again, the data that's required to execute a lot of those actuarial processes are in the JM&A group. So you do have, I'll say, more bespoke technologies aligned to the core business of each of those. But then underpinning all of them, you've got, we're trying to have resilient and future-proof architectures that are cloud native. So cloud is one of those connective tissues, or that glue, that we use across the business units. Data and advanced analytics, and just like everyone else, whether it's machine learning from artificial intelligence from a machine learning standpoint, or generative AI, how we and what and where do we apply these technologies are things we're looking at from an enterprise standpoint. Now, the value really is within the business units, because they've got, the opportunity, but what platforms we use, like how do we have controls and governance over these things? We approach that from an enterprise standpoint to make sure that we really can leverage the scale of the entire company.
Yeah.
But are still, bringing very tactical and tangible value.
Yeah. And so what are some, going back to the question we had about Walmart and GE, what kind of data issues are you kind of solving here?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it, getting back to like supply chain and logistics, in how do you optimize routes, and how do you most optimally not just distribute parts from parts distribution centers to the dealerships, but also even down to where are those parts placed within the warehouse, so that the associates that are picking and packing, these orders, it's like, again, it's, I can nerd out about this stuff. It's like such a juicy optimization problem of, all right, you've got parts that are, small, picked more often. You've got ones that are small but picked less often. You've got hoods that are giant and require, additional equipment to pick. How do you stage all that and create even the physical space that is backed by data? Because you know, just like the GE and the Walmart examples. I mean, if you can save fractions of associates' time, or if you can reduce, you know, by percentages, or increase the accuracy of orders by percentages, you know, all of that stuff adds up into really tangible value that hits the bottom line.
Yeah, and I think the Camry is the most popular car in the country, correct?
I believe so.
If it's not one, it's maybe two.
Yeah.
Two or three. So you guys are just processing just an unbelievable amount of vehicles.
Exactly. Yeah.
So-
Like vehicles, parts, accessories. It's just, you know, it's interesting. It's, you know, one of those things when part of what I love about JM and you know, these businesses is it can be easy to look at that and be like, oh, it's just, you know, it's cars, it's parts, like,
Right.
you know, just get them in, get them through. But, you know, we'll look at a vehicle. It's like that, you know, that's not just a vehicle. That's someone who saved up, you know, for their first car,
Right.
or, you know, they're going to college and their parents bought them their first car, or that's not just a part that we've got to get to a dealer. You know, that's someone whose car's broken down, is,
Right.
you know, is waiting for that part to get back to work or whatever. So it's, you know, it's just a really, again, it's high volume, but it impacts people. It's very relevant and tangible.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else about JM you want to, your experiences there? I mean, it's been named, you know, I mean, it's been named one of the best places to work in South Florida.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the culture like a little bit?
I mean, the culture, and this was one of the big draws, I would say, for me, is, I mean, the culture is really phenomenal and really unique. I mean, some of these are going to seem like really silly examples. There's, you know, hair salon and a nail salon and a doctor's office and a credit union on site on campus there. Like, there's obviously food services and stuff, but it, you know, it really is a culture where people are there. You know, they're there for a long time. Like, we know each other. We know each other's kids and families, and you know, they have a family festival. I think they call it Fun Fest or something, where, you know, brought my family, and you know, there's like carnival rides, and they had like artificial snow, and like, which was super amusing, and like even stuff like that, all the way down to the little stuff. So, you know, when I can, I'll bring my daughter into the office before I drop her off at school, and like, we'll have pancakes in the cafeteria, and like, she knows, she loves it. Like, the pancakes are as big as her face, but you know, like, she knows the guy, you know, cooking cooking the pancakes, and like, she's like, oh, hey, how's Mr. So-and-so? It's like, he's great. Like, I'll see him. She's like, hey, how's my friend? It's like, she's great. She'll be here next week. So like, even like small little connections like that make it super phenomenal, compared or coupled with the fact that, you know, you can work on extremely interesting technology problems that, again, like, have real impact to the bottom line. And, you know, no one would know and think it, but, you know, whether it's cloud native, whether it's AI, like all of these, you know, leading edge technologies, you know, we're looking to ways to leverage that to, you know, like I say, make sure JM Family stays successful for the next several decades.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, at that volume of selling cars, those little things, like you said, the location of parts in the warehouse, over tons of transactions make a massive difference in the bottom line.
Exactly.
So, well, let's talk a little bit about, why don't you give some tips to people? Because obviously you're well-versed in the industry.
Yeah.
Where things are going. A lot of people are watching this are just starting out or kind of early career.
Yeah.
I tell people to learn Python. You mentioned Python.
Yeah.
I say, when in doubt, just learn Python.
Yeah.
This is what I tell people.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? What do you like to see? What's going on in the future?
Yeah. It's you know, it's a great question. You know, a few things in no particular order. So one, I'm also a big fan of Python for a number of different reasons. You know, one is it's a good programming language to learn. It's got a relatively smooth learning curve, so you can get into it, you can start to get productive, but then you can keep learning. It's a bit of a utility language. You can use it for data, you can use it for scripting and things like that. One thing I would also tell people is, right, yeah, learn the language, but also make sure you're mastering the concepts behind the language, whether it's, how to break down a problem into bite-sized functions, how to make not just, how to not just write code, but engineer software so that it's understandable and it's readable and it's testable. Those are things that, I would encourage folks to do. But then also don't shy away or don't focus too hard, too early on like, all right, I want to be in tech. That means I need to be a software engineer and like I need to learn a language or maybe a couple of languages. Make sure that you're learning some things that are tangential too, whether it's, learn a little bit about networking, learn a little bit about cloud. Well, learn a lot about cloud. That's another one that, whether it's AWS, GCP, Azure, like learn the concepts and then you'll be able to apply those concepts, whether it's, Azure Compute or an EC2 instance. Some of the things, especially on the infrastructure side, are more analogous, but again, the concepts of cloud, learn a little bit about cybersecurity, learn a bit about data, whether it's databases, data warehousing, data modeling. So like, yeah, you don't want to be a total just utility player, jack of all trades, right. An inch deep and a mile wide, but have both breadth and depth is something that I would tell folks. The other thing that I alluded to a little bit earlier is learn a little bit about business. So when I was starting off as a technologist, I was like, all right, if I'm in software, the amount of effort that I would have to expend to be in like the top 10% of programmers would be tremendous because there's a lot of super smart people out there, a lot of people that are way smarter than I am. Most, if not all engineers are probably smarter at engineering than I am at this point. Most engineering I do nowadays is PowerPoint engineering as opposed to anything else. But as opposed to, you learn a little bit about finance. You learn, what an income statement is and a balance sheet and cash flows and like how the business impacts those financials and ultimately how whatever you're working on impacts those. Like you spend a little bit of time there and you're going to be ahead of 90% of the folks in technology, or a large percentage, whatever that percentage is. So find some of those little ancillary skills that it's easier to differentiate you as an individual and make you more well-rounded. Whether that's, I'll say, other general skill sets outside technology like finance, whether it's getting deep in an industry, that's another one where it's good to focus on an industry. And if you have a particular passion, for an individual industry, that's great. But there's also something to be said for branching out of your industry. Like, okay, if you grow up in financial services and like, all right, I'm in financial services, like I still use analogies related to supply chain when I explain data. And like, whether you're in financial services or whether you're in automotive, like people just get it. They're like, you think about data and you think about data warehousing and last mile delivery, just like, all right, you order something from Walmart and it, gets to a fulfillment center and maybe the local super center, and then a truck actually has to get it to your door. Same thing happens in data where you can have a data warehouse, but like, how do you actually get that last mile of the data delivered to the business user? Right. They're like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like, because I was exposed to a lot of concepts related to supply chain, like that's helped round out my thinking, even, for no other reason than to be able to use analogies.
Yeah. Yeah. And then obviously you've interviewed tons of people through your career.
Yeah.
And part of my job is kind of preparing people to speak to people like you.
Yeah.
And just me trying to analyze, okay, this is probably what he wants to hear. This is what he said. So why don't we hear it right from you? I mean, your interviews.
Yeah.
How do they go down? What do you like to hear? What do you like to ask?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you almost exactly of what I ask in almost every single interview. So one, I'll ask, and I'm not saying everyone is as prepared as I am for interview. Like I will have already gone through your resume. So, I'll ask like, tell me about yourself. And I'll typically also say something to the effect of, you don't have to drain your resume because I have read it, but if there's anything that you want to highlight, that's an opportunity for you to pick out, very specific, whether it's, hopefully you will have already researched the company and the role. And so you can curate pieces of your CV or your resume that you think most align with the role, and or the company. So like that's your time to do that, as opposed to, all right, I just told you I don't need you to drain your CV, but yeah, you're going to start from your childhood and you're going to take me through. So that's one thing I almost always ask, regardless of the actual questions. Tell me about a time when X, Y, Z. As much as you can, I'll say, bring me into the room with you. So instead of I was here in this role and the team did this and the result was this, like, that's your time, where I'm really trying to understand, like, what did you individually do? How do you individually handle situations? So as much as you can get into, specifics, that's something that I really look for in interviews of, like, all right, what was the impact? Like, if you wouldn't have been involved, would the outcome have been any different? So that's something. And then, I always, like, typical how you ended the interview, like, I almost always try and reserve a decent amount of time for questions from the candidate.
Yeah.
And I'm not looking for, like, you came up with the most brilliant question, but it's questions that indicate that you've done your research. So, things other than, like, oh, what's it like working there? Right. Or, like, tell me about the team. It's as much as you can demonstrate that, you really are trying to, it's going to sound, I expect you to be interviewing me as much as I'm interviewing you.
Right.
Because we want to make sure that this role is a fit for both of us. It's not just, I'm trying to get this job because I want a job. It's like, nope, this is a role. And if you're not excited and happy and know what you're walking into, don't want you to be, disappointed. And the converse is true. Like, I want you to be so excited about this job or this role coming in from day one. So I'd say, those are the three big things I would say from an interview standpoint. So one, pick out ahead of time, some of those curated things from your CV or your resume that align to the role in the company. Two, be specific and, really give examples that demonstrate what your individual impact is and gives the interviewer an insight into your thought process. And then third, hopefully in your interviews, people are asking for questions from you. So, don't phone it in on that portion. Don't be like, oh, all right, I got through the actual interview. Now we're in the part where, I get to ask them questions. It's, again,
still the interview.
It's still part of the interview.
Showing yourself.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And I've had people like yourself where I'll talk to them after and the candidate will, we liked him. He was good. But then we asked for questions. He just said, nah.
Yeah. You're like, oh, I already talked to a couple people that, that work there. I think I've got a good handle on it.
Right.
Like,
it's like, that's not,
okay.
It's not the point of this.
Yeah.
It's to show your homework.
Exactly.
So, like, what would be a couple good, I know you said it's not going to be this, like, oh, that's the most amazing question ever.
Yeah.
But give me an example of something they could ask.
I'll give you an example of a compare contrast of, like, I'll say a normal question to a really differentiated question. A normal question might be, what's the culture like there?
Right.
Okay, I can do my best to try and explain it. I'll explain it probably very similar to I did to you. A way to make that a lot more impactful is to say, well, the culture at, the place I'm working at now is XYZ. Here's what I like about it. Here's what, sometimes, I don't like about it. Kind of explain the culture of JM, and kind of how that relates. And it shows a couple things. One, it's almost the same question. It's like, hey, what's the culture? You're getting at the same thing, but it demonstrates to me that, you've thought deeply enough about the culture and you're introspective enough to relate how that impacts you and your job satisfaction, that now I can more surgically guide my answer to say, well, here are things that are similar. Here are things that are way different. here are things that are different that align to what you like about your current culture. Here's things that are different that maybe, you could look at in a different way. So again, even just that little couch or the added personalization of the question, can go miles and turn like hey, what's your culture like, to like, hey, my current culture, here are the dynamics. Here's what I love and here's what I don't love. How does that relate to the culture at JM? It makes it that much more personalized.
Yeah. And then you can use kind of that structure for other general questions.
Exactly.
So what type of technologies you use? Well, we use it here. We use this, this, and this. I like some of this stuff. What do you got? So you can tailor any question with that format, I feel like.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so I know we talked about, early on, we talked about, some of the, seeing a consultant walk out the door at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
And saying like, oh man, that would be nice. But so what type of person would be probably a good fit for your track, and what type of person, I don't know, what are some type of people that would not kind of do well in your career path?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I would, I chuckle. It's like, it's the exception versus the rule, where I wish I could, leave at 5 o'clock. A lot of it is just because like there's like super interesting problems to work on. Like I love nerding out about it. I'd say people that tend to be more successful, and I'll go back to a bunch of the common themes. Like, you can look beyond the technology and really try and grasp and demonstrate an understanding of the problem that we're trying to solve. Because, technologists, contract or otherwise, that I've seen be the most successful, aren't just, okay, I need you to develop these functions, go crank out these functions, check the code in the repo, try and deploy it, and go on about our business. It's like, what are we actually trying to solve? Because oftentimes, or many times, the problem that we're trying to solve could be solved in a much different way if someone really understands the problem. So, at least the inquisitiveness, at a minimum, the inquisitiveness to try and understand the problem, and that might not influence an approach. But where folks are wildly successful is like, okay, like, I think I understand the problem. I understand what you're asking me to do. Maybe if we tried something else that you didn't ask me to, didn't explicitly ask for, like that might solve the problem. The outcome might be like, I get it. Maybe I've got some additional context that I didn't share with you. So still, this is the approach. But, more often than not, or in those examples where it's like, what, I hadn't thought of that. Like, all right, let's, can we do this? But then also let's try your approach and see what happens. So like I say, the inquisitiveness to peel through the problem is really, really important and impactful. I would say even just having passion and energy for the work, and not saying, all right, every single thing I need to do every hour of every day can be emerging tech, leading tech, AI, cloud, all this. Like, I use this analogy, like sometimes you gotta make coffee, right, or you gotta refill the paper in the printer.
Yeah.
Like, I do that. I mean, it's a silly example, like, sure, walk by and I'm like, oh, printer's out of paper. Like, I'm not gonna wait for someone else to, like, I'll put printer in the paper. Like, who cares that I'm a CTO? I don't even know what that means. Right. But sometimes you gotta, it's like I tell my 5-year-old, like, you gotta eat your vegetables. It's like, everything can't be steak and dessert. Like, there's always parts of the job that we don't like, and you gotta, approach those with the same passion that you do, the parts that maybe you're super stoked about.
Right. They're not all fun problems necessarily. They're not all cool, interesting data problems you're solving, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so any parting words for people that are like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. Get their now. I mean, one thing about you, I was kind of under the impression that for an executive, you needed the higher level degree, but you were able to get there with a bachelor's, correct?
Yeah, I actually, I mean,
So
incidentally, I did end up getting a master's, not because I needed to, and I just finished it up a couple years ago. So I was already a CTO before I got a graduate degree. Yeah, the degree itself, you know, no degree, in my opinion, is a substitute for demonstrated experience. So that really is, you know, what has served me the best is, you know, I essentially got my graduate degree by going through a dozen different industries and a multitude of countries and cities and, you know, geographies and everything. So that, you know, that's really what was a big catalyst for my career. I've seen degrees or, you know, certifications are also great, where you need to maybe get started or start to round out some knowledge in some areas that you might not have exposure to. So let's say, you know, you're in data, but you want to learn cloud. It's like, well, you could start with a certification. Like that's a really great way to get your foot in the door before just taking the plunge and say, well, I'm going to try and, you know, take a role in a cloud team to get the experience there. So certifications are a good way to get your foot in the door. Also, you know, don't underestimate the power of a network. And don't just use your network when you're looking for a job.
Right.
That's another big piece of advice that I would give is, you know, if the only time you reach out to somebody is like, hey, I'm looking for my next role, people are going to know that.
Right.
You know, so leverage, you know, build your network and leverage your network. But yeah, I mean, from the question about the degrees, I don't personally view an advanced degree as a prerequisite, but, you know, it can help with network. It can help, like I say, round out some skills. I've seen a lot of technologists be successful, you know, getting business degrees or MBAs or things like that, because that is a little bit easier of a track versus taking a business role and then coming back. But yeah, I don't. Advanced degrees can be a good arrow in someone's quiver, but it's not the only arrow.
Yeah, because that's kind of the advice I tell people. I'm like, I mean, from what I see, you really don't need it. But then I always have that. It's funny because like then I found you. I kind of like killed my own theory. I'm just like, well, you don't really need an advanced degree except if you want to be an executive, and you just kind of destroyed that statement.
Yeah.
So I mean, with the young people that you're coming across in your organizations, do they even? I mean, most of them have bachelors, or some people just kind of jumping right into the technology space.
Yeah, I mean, we see both. So, you know, again, like degrees will help, but then also, I mean, experience. Like, there's no substitute for experience. So, yeah, I mean, you might have, you know, I've worked with extremely talented technologists that have degrees in things way outside of technology, and then, but they got into the industry and they have demonstrated experience, and they dug in and they learned the specific tech and they learned the business problems and can make that connection. So, have gone that route, but also, especially I will say it is easier starting out in tech. You know, if you do have a technology oriented degree, because it gives you all the basics. So you don't need to find roles and build up that resume of experience that, someone will look at all right, I know computer science bachelor's. I know generally what that entails. So, that's, I would say from a bachelor's standpoint, that's something. But even like in no way did anyone tell me like, oh yeah, you should go get your master's degree, or like you need it to get to the next level. I mean, I could have been in this same seat with this same role talking to you about this without it. It's just,
Wow.
It was more for my own intellectual curiosity than anything career related.
Wow. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, anything else as far as advice for young people? I mean, you've given us a lot, but
yeah,
if there's anything
I would
else
say,
you can think of.
Yeah, the only other nugget, I would lay on you really is, two things maybe. Because I know, we talked a lot about compensation, or talked a bit about compensation structures. Like, salary is not the only thing. Just, as you're weighing options and offers and all that, just make sure and look at the total package. Because there's some things that, you might not think of that, can be meaningful for folks. And then the second thing is really about leaders. So I have taken roles with great leaders that I might not have looked at that role, but because I wanted to work with or for or around a person, I'll take a role. And then inevitably, I'll learn from that leader and like can morph the role into something that's more exciting or more energizing. But yeah, also, seek out those leaders that, you want to be around. So if you're looking at roles in your own company, or if you're looking at roles in different companies, just I have personally had a higher weighting or a very high weighting on the leader, and the manager, because one, they'll just have a very direct impact on your own, mental well-being, when you're going to work day to day, but also they can be one of the biggest conduits for learning and professional development that you'll have, in addition to, courses and certifications and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I mean, it's the dining table conversations. But
That's right.
It doesn't have to be bad.
Exactly.
Right?
That's
you could
right.
say, this guy's great.
Yeah.
So, keep that in mind as well. So, all right. Well, John, listen, this was awesome. I'm so happy we made this happen. Thanks for making the trip down. And definitely check out JM Family, a technology company that you probably didn't know about before this, but you should definitely check out. So we'll catch you guys next time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.